Hello! Newly haircut and shaved Jimmy back again. I'm always on a constant quest to find larger and more impressive trousers, and this year I think I have finally achieved peak pants. So first of all, a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you so much to everybody who's been keeping up with my posts over on Patreon and on the community tab. You guys have been really encouraging and really supportive through a fairly difficult little period that I'm going through at the minute, so thank you very much indeed for your patience. Videos have been delayed and all kinds of other stuff, but thank you to all my patrons and all of you guys who've been sending me coffee donations and just making sure I'm okay through messages and stuff. You guys are all the best. So one of the problems when you're trying to figure out how clothes worked 1,000 years ago is very often you've only got one piece of dodgy writing that you can't necessarily 100% trust and that people have been misinterpreting for hundreds and hundreds of years. And thankfully, when it comes to Viking baggy pants, we have two pieces of slightly dodgy text that thousands of people have been misinterpreting for hundreds of years, which is great. So we'll start with the text evidence, and then we're going to move on to the archaeology, and then we're going to move on to how I actually built these damn things. The first one that we have to look at is a text, an anonymous text by a Persian writer, possibly an Afghan Persian writer of the 10th century, and the text is called the Hudud al-Alam, and this mentions that the Rus, specifically the Rus, way up in the Volga, way up in sort of Eastern Europe, very, very far away from the archaeology where we're going to talk about, were making their, basically, the big guys probably in their area, the chiefs, the Khagans, they're called Khagans in the text. Seriously, these people were very much influenced by, like, Khazar culture. Anyway, were making trousers out of linen of around 100 cubits. Bear in mind that an early Islamic cubit varies in size depending on where and when we're talking about, and a cubit is between about 40 and about 100 inches, so fucking big trousers. Ibn Rustar also tells us that the Rus were using vast amounts of cloth to make trousers, but he says that they were using 100 cubits per leg. That's just nonsense. The texts that we've got are a bit dodgy. They don't really match up with the images and the archaeology necessarily, and making trousers out of that much cloth is just impossible if you want to be using them for any kind of practical purpose. Like, if you want to ride a horse or walk, no, that's a tent. The text is useful, it's cool, it tells us that the Rus were wearing massive pants in the 10th century, but it doesn't really help us in any way figure out what they looked like or how they worked. The Hudud al-Alam tells us that they were tucked up at the knee, so they were presumably rolling these pants up or just hoiking them up and then tying them off at the knee with a garter, or they were tucking them into hose or leg wraps. Cool, that's what we got so far. Have we got any other evidence? Thankfully, yes. These pants are pretty famous. We've got things like carved stones. Here's one from Smies in Gotland, and I like saying Smies, it's a good word to say. Smies. The Smies stone, Smies, has a picture of these two guys fighting on it, and they're fighting with swords and shields and some sleeves, and they have these big, unconstrained, baggy trousers. And these things are really cool to see, because this gives us an indication that, yes, these are actually trousers. They're pants, as we would know them today. In the UK, we say pants to mean underpants. I know I have a lot of North American viewers, so I'm saying pants to refer to trousers, but apologies to my fellow Britons. These things are big, unconstrained trousers. They're massive. They look like bell-bottoms. They're huge. So, the idea that people were wearing large amounts of fabric in their trousers is borne out by this image. That's okay, that's one image. Have we got any more? Yes, we have. We've got more Gotland picture stones showing people wearing constrained baggy trousers. The idea is that these are the same pants that have been tucked in at the knee, or gartered at the knee, or held up by leg wraps at the knee. And considering we do have finds of things like leg wraps and garment hooks at the knees of skeletons, like the one at Birka, this is starting to make some sense. This looks like maybe these are giant baggy-ass pants. Cool. Are they worn anywhere else? Yes, we have metal finds like this little guy, and we even have a carved stone in the north of England, in Sockburn, that is really nice. It shows a guy wearing baggy trousers that have been tucked in at the knee, riding a horse with a falcon on his wrist. How cool is that? So, these appear to be for your big cheese, your big local lad. You've got access to loads of fabric, you've probably got access to lovely dye stuffs to dye them nice colours. You make yourself a big pair of these fashionable 10th century baggy trousers, and that is what I'm aiming to make. Have we got any other clues as to how these things were actually built? Well, yes, we have, as it happens, and these come from somewhere else entirely. These come from Hedeby, in what is now northern Germany, sort of Schleswig-Holstein situation. It used to be Denmark and now it's Germany, and borders are all artificial and everything's nonsense, especially in this period. The Hedeby fragment is a really interesting one, and a lot of the time when we have fragments of clothing, it's really difficult to interpret what they are, but this one is fairly obviously the crotch area of a pair of trousers. And we have a bit of waistband, we have a crotch piece, we have two other bits of wool to either side of the crotch piece, and we even have a bit of a bum gore. In the later sagas, so this is way later than what we're talking about right now, this is 13th century, they mention trousers with seat gores, and we know that the gore, the big piece of cloth in the bum part of your pants, is something that medieval people were using, so it seems like this is a thing. So the fragment has been interpreted by a few people, and one of the main people who's done it is Linda Haig, and the suggestions are manifold, but the main suggestion is because of the number of folds of cloth in the fragment, these would have been a really baggy pair of trousers, and that's led everybody to go, oh my god, it's the pants, it's the baggy pants, this is the fragment of the baggy pants, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. The problem is, a lot of the textile fragments from Hedeby come from ship caulking. They were used as caulking for ships, so they were covered in pitch and then they were shoved into the gaps in a boat, in the woodwork of a boat. So it's not complete, it's a bit rough and ready, and it probably had a very long life before it got to this stage. Like, it was probably worn until it was almost rags, then when it was ragged, it was torn up even more and shoved between the planks of a boat. But from it, we know that the legs were dyed a red colour and that the seat was dyed a yellowy green colour. I don't have access right now to the weights of wool in those colours that would allow me to make it exactly the same, so mine are just going to be a reddy pinky colour. The fragment is of a nice fine wool, well sewn together, that suggests that this was a pair of trousers that kind of conforms to several different types of trousers we already have, like the famous, much earlier Thorsbjerg trousers, which include a crotch piece and a back piece for your bum, and a separate waistband, and two pieces for the trousers. Great stuff. We can make that, that's relatively simple. The next issue here is kind of how much cloth do we use? I'm not using 100 cubits of cloth, that would be insane. Thankfully, other people have done some of the work for me, and I don't believe in reinventing the wheel every time I make something, so I went over to Project Broadaxe, where they've done loads of stuff. You've heard me talk about the blog before, they've done some great research, and they have a piece on the Viking baggy pants, so I kind of went with how they did it-ish. I made a couple of mistakes that we're going to talk about later, but basically, I went over to my fabric shop, where they carried a lovely pink, 100% fine wool fabric that I thought would be just the job. I bought myself 5 yards of it, like basically 5 meters of cloth, to make a pair of pants. That's more than I'd need to make a tunic. And I got to work. So the first thing I decided to do was do a waist measurement. Did a waist measurement, figure out what I need this fabric to fit into, right? Because it's all very well having a ton of fabric, but I'm not that wide, I'm that wide. So how am I going to get this to this? First decision, do I pleat into the waistband? Yes, I'm going to pleat it into the waistband. I could have an unconstrained waistband with a drawstring where it's just the width of the trousers. That's not really what the archaeology is suggesting, the fragment's suggesting that these were well tailored at the top end at least, so I'm going to be pleating the top. How am I going to pleat them? knife pleats, because box pleats are a pain in the bum, and knife pleats are easy. I didn't measure them millimetre perfect. I used my thumb and decided that every couple of inches I was just going to put a pleat in to try and get it down to my natural waist, which at that point was 34 inches, in case anybody is interested. The fabric itself is 60 inches wide, okay? That's 5 feet. And 5 foot wide fabric times 2 means I have a 10 foot waistline, which I need to stuff into basically a 3 foot, 1 yard waistline. So effectively 60 times 2, 120 into 34. So I had to do a lot of pleating to get that all in there. Then I forgot that I had the bum piece as well. So I undid all the pleating around the bum, moved all of the pleats around until they basically matched, and then we were basically there. This is a lot of information, but basically I have a waistband fitted to my waist, and I have 60 inches of fabric per leg in width. The length of the trouser was the next decision. I decided to go with the Smith's stone as kind of my preferred length. It's sort of ankle, just above the ankle from what I can tell. It's difficult to know. I tried to make these effectively Viking pedal pushers. Where would these have been worn is difficult to know. A high waist, like a natural waist just under the ribs, completely possible, or just above the hips. We know that some early and high medieval underwear and braise seems to have been worn quite low, below the belly, so I decided that that's where I was going to wear these. These are going to basically be sort of modern fit trousers, where they fit at the hips. So hang on, I'm going to stand up. So my waist, my natural waist with my ribs is here. My trousers are down here. Okay, waist here, trousers here. We're doing that. So I've decided on pleating this pile of fabric into the waistband, and I've decided on the length. Great. The next thing that I'm going to do, which probably isn't accurate to the originals, but I'm going to do it anyway, is I'm going to make a placket, because I like to be able to pee without taking off all my clothes. So we've now made a few decisions. The next thing to do is the scary thing, which is cut the cloth. Thankfully the cloth is 60 inches wide. 60 inches is a lovely round number, so I basically cut down from my waist measurement to my ankle measurement twice. Job done. 2 big rectangular pieces of cloth. Fantastic. Then I did the waistband. Probably should have cut the waistband first. I screwed up the waistband, so I had to cut a patch piece to put into the waist, which is why my waistband looks a bit silly, and then carried on. Next I need the crotch piece. The crotch piece I basically kind of eyeballed to what would be comfortable and allow me lots of movement. So I gave myself a 4-inch wide crotch piece. The crotch piece goes from the waist of these trousers right the way around to halfway up my buttock. And because I've been doing my squats lately, that was a nice easy measurement. Then I put in a bum piece, the seat gore. This is where I made a mistake. The seat gore in the original is tapered. So it's wider at the top, narrower at the bottom. And if you look at the blog, which I'll link to, they do that as well. I forgot to do that and I made it square. And that is why you always read every step of the pattern when you're working. It has affected how the trousers hang at the back. So it does mean that there is a bit of a tug between 2 of the pleats. It doesn't mean it's going to rip. There's plenty of fabric. It just means that the seat kind of pulls against the seams next to it. Beware. That means all of the pieces of the trousers are basically done. Waistband, crotch, seat, 2 legs. Champion. Pin them all up, test them, it fits, I can move, I stab myself, ow, and then sew them all up. The pleating was the bit that took the longest, but the pleating was actually quite therapeutic. I basically just sat and binged the X-Files, the original X-Files, and had a lovely time. And by the end of it, I had effectively a quarter of the size of fabric, which made it so much easier to handle. You sew up the sides of the legs and make sure that your crotch piece and your seat piece are fitting and they're at the right height and all that kind of thing. It's kind of like wearing one of those sumo wrestler loincloths, but with buttless chaps half sewn on at the waistband. It's really odd when you look at yourself in the mirror trying these trousers on at that stage. Once all of this had been sewn up, and I am not Bernadette, I am not Rachel, I cannot make this an attractive aesthetic process. Me sewing is basically a sweaty, pasty, hairy man, cross-legged, with his ape fists attempting to force needle through fabric. Like, I do not have delicious sewing footage for you. I have this. This is what I have. So, just imagine, use your imagination, suspend your disbelief, close your eyes, imagine, pretend that I'm sitting in like a nice puffy shirt and I'm wearing beautifully tailored clothing. I basically imagine me, but on the body of Zach Pinsent, and with the hands of Zach Pinsent, and we'll go with that. So anyway, I sewed it up. I sewed it up with a double row of running stitch. Loads of people have criticised me before now when I've said I use a backstitch, and they're like, oh, they didn't have backstitch back then. I'm like, alright, fine, I won't use a backstitch then. Let all my clothes fall apart. So I used a small running stitch, and I'm quite proud of my running stitch on this. I think it's a really small, nice, neat running stitch. The next sort of final stage was, in construction, was putting a lining into the waistband. These need a lining in the waistband unless you have a big long waistband that you fold over, and I didn't do that. I made a strip of the wool, and then I decided to line it with linen. Except I sewed the linen on the wrong side. So I now have a linen waistband, like the Project Broadaxe ones, which isn't what I was going for, lined in wool. So yay for not knowing what side of the cloth I'm working on. This is absolutely just a cock-up. I did not mean to do that, but I think it looks kind of cool. Then there's decisions to make like belt loops or drawstrings, and I went for neither, because I don't think it needs them. I've worn them with a belt, and I've worn them with a tablet woven silk, basically braid around the waist, with the waistband just folded over it, and it's been absolutely fine. It's been fine with running, walking, climbing up and down stairs, running up and down stairs, fighting, doing forward rolls in my backyard. It's absolutely fine. So I didn't bother. At one point, I thought I might put a button closure on it, using a bead. Didn't bother. Didn't bother with that. And then the last stage was felling the seams and hemming the bottoms, which is hemming a metre of cloth for a pair of pants. These things are so dumb, but they're so comfy, and they look really nice. And that's it. That was it. That was me making the trousers. I made them. I did it. There's a link to the blog that I used. Loads of people have asked me what pattern did I use, and I didn't use a pattern. I eyeballed the basic shapes. Like, I'm not a patterner. I am a draper. I drape things. I put the shapes out. I put the cloth out on the floor. I visualize the shapes. I measure them, and then normally I check them with a spare piece of cloth to see if they fit. Like, I don't normally work from a pattern. I find that stressful, but the closest I've got to offer is the link in the description below. So what do they look like? Well, I think they look pretty damn cool. So you can see from the footage that when they're constrained, they have a nice poof out, but it's not mad. The pleats don't fit quite as well as I wanted them to into like nice long, like you see these long lines in some of the drawings, and I wanted to have those long pleats all the way down. I think if I had taken a bit of time in tucking them into my leg wraps better, they'd have those, but I think that's by the by. I don't think that's my fault in how I've made the pants. You'll see in Project Broadaxe they've made them with them constrained at the knee already into knee bands. I haven't done that. Maybe at some point I will, or maybe I will make another pair where I do that, but Regardless, they're way better than my first attempt, and when they're unconstrained, I think they look great. They're basically the Rachel Maxey secret pants, right? They're huge. And if you're thinking, petticoat breeches, well, yeah, like they are basically a pair of petticoat breeches for an 18th century sailor. Slightly different in construction at the top end, but they work like that. And that shouldn't really surprise us, because right the way through history we see sailors wearing big baggy breeches and trousers, and that's because they're really practical to wear. There's a reason they were wearing bell-bottoms into the 20th century, and it's mostly tradition, but it's also because they're practical. So there you go, my big baggy Viking pants, and if any of you guys make a pair and you use the blog, do tag me in your Instagram posts. It's really cool when people tag me in their Instagram posts and they're like, hey, thanks Jimmy, you helped me to get confidence to make this piece of clothing. Like, I need that right now, so that's really cool, thank you. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed making these pants, and I'm looking forward to making some other bits and bobs to go with them. And the red tunic, we'll be getting a video about it as well. I did not make that. And yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn am ymuno, unwaith eto. Thank you very much indeed for joining once again. And till the next time, tan y tro nesa, hwyl am y tro, bye for now.